Welcome to another episode of the Commute podcast, a conversational podcast exploring the stories, insights, and strategies behind learning centric communities. Our mission is to inspire listeners by highlighting individuals who are shaping the future of how people come together to learn, grow, and thrive. We're honored today to host Philippe Arnez, high flow culture coach and the founder of Culture for Flow. He is a certified facilitator for the Working Genius model as well. Philippe's expertise in building purpose driven company cultures and fostering organizational health provides us with invaluable insights into leadership, community building, and unlocking peak performance in teams. I'm very excited to speak with Philippe today and share his insights around flow with all of you. Philippe, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Let's start a little bit, Philippe, speaking about your personal journey. I found your work on LinkedIn, and it really appealed to me. This idea of this practice that you're building around uh, harnessing flow to
Mm.
create and foster cultures of collaboration and help companies thrive, help organizations and teams thrive. Tell us a bit more about your background, Philippe. What inspired you to kind of transition from the more, I guess, corporate space where you were previously to
Yeah.
founding this company that you have today?
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure. It's always nice to talk about these topics. And I'll try to keep it short. It's I have a fairly privileged background, I would say. I was born and grew up in Switzerland. I had the privilege to get a top education at a great institution in Switzerland. And like so many that have that background, I ended up in a fairly standard corporate role, and started climbing that ladder. And yeah, it's just that at some point, um, I started with that work in Switzerland, and then I got the opportunity to work abroad, and actually worked and lived in Peru, in Latin America. And And during that time that I was working there, our company was acquired. So it was a huge corporation, number two in its industry, and then we were acquired by the market leader, and that was a huge merger that happened, um, and that brought about a very big cultural change because these companies were operating in very different ways. And under the new management, I kind of worked 1 year, and then I left because it was just not compatible with me. It was a very different approach to business, and from my perspective, at least, it was not very healthy or sustainable in terms of how people were working there, and the expectations, and the support, and the whole culture. Which some people thrive under that. It wasn't the case for me, but I guess that sparked the interest in the topic of actually what makes a culture, what even defines the culture. How do different companies get to their cultures, and which ones are maybe more, have a more focus on the long term, others maybe less so. And how is this all, the so-called toxic cultures versus healthy cultures. And so that just sparked my interest. And after I left, we moved here to Finland, where I'm living now, and I completely changed the place I worked. So I joined a small startup in the healthcare space, and so that was, you know it was a very radical change, right, from a corporation of 10,000 of people to a team of 10, and from a fairly commoditized industry to a very highly regulated industry. And but it allowed me to kind of dive into a completely new environment, which was this startup environment and ecosystem, which is, yeah, very dynamic and thriving, I would say, in Finland and in the Nordics. There's a lot of innovation in different areas, and so it was super exciting to kind of get into all of that. And I was kind of expecting, to find new approaches, different cultures, more purpose driven companies, which is true to some extent. But the longer I was in that startup environment, the more I was like, well, it's still the same money game, and it's still this hustling. And even though a lot of these companies and startups start as, with a lot of purpose, and they're purpose driven founders and purpose driven companies, we see a lot of them kind of being corrupted and, falling back into the same game of just more profit, without caring so much about their people and the impact they have on the planet. And so I was like, okay, how can I somehow contribute to a change in that space? How can we somehow channel the energy of all these entrepreneurs and brilliant minds and innovations into a place that actually helps the planet and helps the people, rather than creating more problems, right? So I think that we've all seen that with the emergence of social media, it has created a lot of issues for especially for the young people. And is there a way to use that energy that goes into, you know rather than going it into the next addictive game, into something that will actually help the kids or the young. So I think it was all of that kind of combined that led me to, okay, how could I make an impact? And I came to the conclusion that it all kind of starts with the culture. Like, if you have a good purpose, that's fine, but if you don't build your culture around it, it might not resist the pressure applied to it. And yeah, and so that's how that came about. And then, I started reading a lot about the topic, studying companies that have done this, and looking at different concepts, and what kind of inspires, what resonates with me. And first I was looking through everything through this kind of organizational health lens, and then I got in touch with flow science, and then I saw a lot of overlap. And so I kind of shifted and said, like, okay, I will put things under the umbrella of flow science, because if you want to create an environment where flow can emerge, you have basically to tick all these organizational health boxes almost. So it very much goes hand in hand. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, I would say.
So, would you say, Philippe, it was a gradual kind of realization over a series of accumulated experiences, right? So, transitioning from the corporate space, seeing kind of maybe some of the toxicity and some of the lack of human centeredness, uh, the lack of feeling like you have a place in the organization to contribute meaningfully, right? So from what I take
Mm.
it, it was this gradual realization over time that really kind of inspired you to say, okay, what can I do to change this?
Yeah, and I think it was also a lot of realization in hindsight. So, when I was in the midst of it, I didn't really realize it. So I didn't, maybe also because it was my first job out of university when I first joined the first corporate. And then until the acquisition, I kind of got used, of course, to what we had. And as the saying goes, you don't appreciate what you have until you lose it. And so I think that the previous culture was much more people centric, and I had a much higher feeling of belonging. And then, after the acquisition, there was this big change, and I kind of lost that feeling of belonging, and got very stressed, and actually also burned out. I didn't realize it at the time, as usual. It's also very often gradual, and you get used, always you kind of rise your tolerance. But in hindsight, when I looked back, and also I actually came across the definition of burnout by the WHO, I was like, well, that actually was how I felt at the time. So yeah, it wasn't like a one. Yeah, it wasn't like a one thing. One day I came out and was like, oh, this has to change, and it was gradual. And I think that acquisition experience and the culture change was maybe one of the kind of triggers, but it was a kind of a subconscious one. And then I kind of started chasing that, and it took many years until I actually realized or landed where I did. um so yeah, definitely, I think that's a good observation. Alright.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels, Philippe, when we think about, your your transition from this company where you felt valued to this feeling of I'm lost. I'm not really sure if I belong here. I'm not really sure
Mm,
if the broader goals align with my personal mission, with my personal vision. Those are the kinds of things I had experienced in acquisition as well. Not
mm,
that early in my career, but I would say maybe 4 or 5 years under my belt. I was working for a startup that was then acquired by a major company, and we lost a lot of the autonomy, right, that we
mhm,
had, and we also lost a lot of our talented colleagues that were either let go involuntarily or decided to voluntarily depart the organization. So, and I think many of our
mhm,
listeners who have been in the corporate space or who are transitioning to their new career or whatever the case might be, I think a lot of us have had experiences, unfortunately, with feeling like we don't belong, creating a culture of acceptance and tolerance and uh, harmony is really important for any organization. Uh, I'm curious, Philippe. I'd love to learn a little bit about maybe flow as a concept, because in
mhm.
graduate school, I read about flow, and I can never pronounce this gentleman's name, but his first name is Mihaly, and his last name is a very
Yes,
long name that I can't pronounce. Right? Was
yes.
Mr. Mihaly's? I can't pronounce his last names. Uh,
Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. Was his theory on flow really important to your understanding and building your company the way it is today?
Yes, it became so. Yeah, it didn't start with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that some of the listeners might be familiar with the work of people like Amy Edmondson or Adam Grant or Patrick Lencioni and many of these thought leaders in the space of organizational psychology and organizational health and so on. Um, and um, but yeah, later on when I kind of came across the flow science and started to see that overlap, definitely Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work um, influenced me heavily. So, and it was not until last year when I attended a conference on positive psychology, where actually flow also sits within that, that I realized actually how much wider his interests were. Right, so he passed away a few years ago, um, and he's mostly known for that, for flow and his research on flow, and he's also kind of sometimes referred to as the father of flow. And it's not that he had discovered the flow states, right? They have existed as long as humans have existed, but he was the first one to kind of apply modern scientific methods to study flow. And and so his work has been very influential, but also be way beyond flow. So flow is what he's known for, and is what also a lot of people have a lot of interest in terms of getting to optimal performance, optimal. Actually, the thing that he refers mostly to is optimal experience. So for him, it's much more whole view of our human experience, and and getting into flow state is just the kind of the result of that. But what really should or what for him is at the center is an optimal experience and the so-called good life. So how can we bring people to that stage where they are just more satisfied with their life? And so when you read um, other works from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he goes a lot into that, like how can we kind of move away even from these topics that are very current today about the unsustainable ways of how um, we produce, and the materialistic approaches to things, like how can we kind of move away to that, to move into more sustainable um, co-living on this planet and so on. So he had a lot of interest in that too, and was kind of trying to show ways to move into that direction. And optimal experience and flow states is kind of one thing that could contribute to that. Um, So yeah, that was now a little bit of a a tangent, but I think it's
Oh, that was
important.
great, Philippe. Yeah. No,
It's
please
important
continue.
to, yeah, sorry, it's important for me uh, to also help spread that knowledge, because I think that we can learn a lot from that. And again, it can be a great guide to build, healthy, sustainable company culture where people can thrive and flourish, right? So that's the other thing. It's that the positive psychology movement is very much attributed or linked to the name of Martin Seligman, um, but Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi was also very closely involved in that, and within the whole construct of positive psychology, this experience and engagement is part of it. That and flow plays into that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that, I've been dabbling into
Hmm.
very much as a, you know, in my free time, and grad school kind of exposed me to some of these principles. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development is another concept that really
Hmm.
informed the way that I build learning experiences. And what I really liked about what you said, Philippe, was it's the experience is really what matters when it comes to flow, right? I
Hmm.
think to the average person listening, when we hear the word flow from just a colloquial standpoint, what might come to mind is, I'm in the zone. I'm in
Yeah,
flow
exactly.
right now.
Hmm.
I'm working, I'm being productive, I'm getting things done. I feel good with where I am. I'm having a positive experience in which I'm producing something or I'm doing something that I enjoy. And there's an output associated with that, which I wouldn't be achieving if I wasn't in this state, right? And the kind of corollary to that, or something that's related to that in terms of learning, because learning is really where I really find a lot
Hmm.
of my values and passions
Hmm.
aligning. It's about the learning experience. So when you design learning that can capitalize on flow, or that can take advantage of the best practices that flow science, stands for, then you get an optimal situation in which the learners are able to not only consume information, but put it to practice, and ideally connect with others that are also engaged in that learning experience. So, that idea of building a
Hmm.
community around a shared understanding or around a shared principle that's being taught, right? So,
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit, Philippe, and ask you about, so now you have this great idea. You've dabbled into, psychology and or I should say organizational psychology, actually, and some of these tenets, and you're
Hmm.
doing this research. What inspired you to go and build your own business and build it around culture for flow, and how did you name it culture for flow? I'm actually very curious about that.
Um, yeah. So I think that maybe just quickly to your point before, it's that
Yeah.
very often this whole flow experience has been reduced to this optimal performance or peak performance and so on. But yeah, as you say, it's about the experience, and yes, the output of these type of flow states is usually superior of what you can produce otherwise. But these
Hmm.
optimal experiences or flow states can also be found in very mundane thing and activities. And then, as you say, for learning, for sure, you can achieve much better learning outcomes if people can get into flow while they learn. I mean, just look any small child when they play. I mean, they they drop into flow easily while they're playing, right? And they learn by playing. And but yeah, to your question, I think that also that was gradual. I'm not the person who has the sudden strike of insight. It's always kind of a process. I have to do a lot of incubation until I get somewhere. And actually, I started also there with the lens of organizational health. But then I realized, I'm taking too much of a, maybe it was too strong influence from the U.S. research and thought leaders that I was taking in. But I kind of realized when I started building that and talking to people about that this concept of organizational health doesn't really land with people here, in non-English speaking countries. And and I've seen now that I think it's re-emerging as corporate health. So we'll see what happens with that term over the next years. But yeah, I think that as I went into that and found the flow science and all the concepts behind that and research behind that, and especially when I got across the research on team flow and group flow, that's when I kind of understood, okay, that could serve as a framework. And and then, the question is, how do you bring that to companies, and how can you, yes, so and for me, the thing is that it at the end all goes through culture, right? So if you want to bring certain practices into a company, it at the end it all boils down to the culture. Is your culture supporting these ways of working, these behaviors, and these things? And then the other question is, in what capacity do you bring this? And culture is something deeply internal to a company, right? So I cannot come as a consultant and say, like, this is what your culture should look like. But if there is a leader that's interested to foster such a culture, then I can come along. I can be a coach, I can be a companion, I can help with maybe some knowledge about flow science and how that informs the things that can be implemented. But the motivation has to come from the leaders, and they must want that change. And so I can help them, if I can help guiding that. But otherwise, it's not on me to tell them what to do, right? So, and then when this kind of all came together, I was like, well, okay, what would be a good name for this? And yeah, I don't know if it's a good name, but I landed on this cultural flow. And then, I think your name choice also is always dependent nowadays on what web domains are available at a reasonable price. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, for me it was, it kind of, you build a culture for flow. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's that.
I think the name is great, honestly. And for as somebody
Thanks.
who's also been an entrepreneur, who's now an entrepreneur, I should say, and choosing domain names
Mm,
and choosing tags for social media and building your identity, your digital identity as a company. There's so much that goes into it.
mm,
So kudos to you for choosing, I think, a very impactful name. And I think
thanks.
it speaks to the mission. I think it speaks to what
Mm,
you're fundamentally focusing on, which is you're a coach, you're a facilitator, you're an expert in organizational psychology, in building these cultures,
mm,
right, in which folks are able to uh, ideally thrive and get to this point of output or satisfaction that they couldn't achieve prior. I would love to know, Philippe, is there one of the things that really resonates with me about what you just said is organizational buy-in, culture being something that's so embedded in
mm,
organizations that it could be years in many cases where folks, problems are simmering, they've been marinating, if I
mm,
can use that word, right? Under the surface, there's dissatisfaction amongst team members,
mm,
and but nobody's really raising those pain points because companies have egos, people have egos, the culture is not, there's no psychological safety, there's no openness
mm,
to speak about things that could really, unravel some of these challenges, right? Uh, do you have an example from your work, without mentioning names or, specific details, in which you
mm.
really had to go in and change that culture, right? From the beginning, before they could even get to flow, you had to really unravel the culture. Is there something like that you can share?
Uh, yeah, yeah. So it's for sure is the case that culture takes time to take shape, right? And I think one of the things that I keep repeating is that culture is always there, right? The question is how intentionally is it being fostered, and in which direction are you guiding it? And what you said, we see, of course, a lot. Cultures where there's no psychological safety, and where people don't dare to speak up, and people get punished, and all kinds of things. And psychological safety is very critical, of course, in everything that I do, and in this whole concept of building a culture around flow. At the end, psychological safety kind of is the thing that goes around all of that. Because if you don't have that, basically all the rest can't happen. Um, and and yeah, I think I can give actually two examples. One is a more, yeah, personal one where I've been involved, and where, in a small team you could feel that there was, like, not that psychological safety, and when the leader came into the room, and
Mm,
it wasn't. And the interesting thing in this case, I think, there's the I think that sometimes it's very in your face. The person comes in and everyone kind of stance changes. But in this one, I think it was
mm,
interesting because it was not so clear, because the person is actually very likable, very nice, and everything. But you could feel whenever there were, like, critical ideas, or things mentioned, like the response was, in a way, it was not bad intentioned, I think, but it was just the way it was delivered that put people into a defensive stance. And so, and then when there was a change in leadership, it took quite a while for you could feel that it took quite a while for the team members to feel safe to speak up and bring up issues and things like that. So, and it was a slow process. It took time. It takes time. Um, Another example I like is from a big company. So it's a Norwegian hospitality group, and um, they they acquired a Finnish hotel chain, and a couple of other hospitality and travel related businesses just before the pandemic.
mm,
And as the pandemic was ebbing off, this owner, he gave a talk at a big conference in Finland, and he kind of opened and proclaimed that culture is king. And it was interesting because he went then on to say how much he cares about the culture, how much he invests into the culture, to build that, and how critical that was to get through the pandemic. And we're talking about hospitality industry, probably one of the
mm.
hardest hit sectors by the pandemic. And thanks to that culture that he has been relentlessly, kind of fostering and build that strong sense of community, people then are willing to go kind of above and beyond when things gets tough, right? So not just for the customers, but also amongst themselves, like between team members. And I think that's one of these things, right? A good culture with this, which gives a strong feeling of community, a strong feeling of belonging, and all of that, pays off when things are tough. And if you try to build that when it's getting tough, it's too late, obviously.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
can absolutely, that absolutely resonates with me because I think culture contributes to the community, and a
Mm,
community can't really survive without a culture, right? If there's no fundamental underpinning of who we are and what we do and what do we stand for, the community will kind of fall apart, right? And that's
yeah.
one of the undercurrents to my entire entrepreneurship journey. And this podcast is,
Mm,
again, how do communities thrive? How do we build communities that are resilient, that are able to withstand the pressures of a global pandemic, in this case, let's say, or other
mm,
forces which are kind of always at play. You have in a capitalist ecosystem, there's always profit, like we mentioned
mm,
earlier in the podcast, right? Are we making enough money? Do we have are we making more money this quarter than we did last quarter, right? I mean,
mm,
these are all pressures, and a resilient culture that has a strong community focus is going to be able to survive those challenges better than those who don't. Uh,
mm,
as we kind of transition towards wrapping up, Philippe, I'd love to
mm,
get your 2 cents or your insight for leaders out there who are aspiring to build high flow cultures, resilient
mm.
cultures that have this community component. What are some takeaways that you would, advice that you would give to them that they can incorporate into their teams?
Yeah. I think we touched some things already. So it all starts with ourselves. So for leaders, it all starts with themselves. So they really need to first invest in themselves and discover what that means for them, and then they must want it, right? So they must be willing to invest resources into it, especially time, because they have to learn about it themselves and they have to kind of find ways to inspire the others. And I'm kind of always amazed when I talk to these, because almost everyone agrees that it's important to invest in teams and culture and all of that. But then when it actually gets to it and it actually is about investing time and money, suddenly it's not that much of a priority anymore. So really make it a priority, and also um, take those steps. And it's an eternal process. And I said, I think that it's about creating clarity around what they aspire to, and then start taking steps. And that's where all these kind of frameworks can help, right? Because then you can have a look and see, like, okay, do we have actually a psychological safe workspace? You can do a small survey which takes 10 minutes and see how do people feel about that. And that's one place to start, right? Or I've built that kind of small model which I also like to use, which, like many other models, is a little pyramid. And we've talked a lot about belonging, and actually I've put that as the foundation of the pyramid. So is there a sense of belonging? Do people feel they belong? Um, if you have that, you can look at the next layer, which is the mindset. Well, what kind of mindset do people bring? Do they think more individually, more collectively? Do they have this learning mindset? Because I think that's the thing that you were talking about, right? Learning. How do we have a learning community? And I mean that applies to a team too, and to companies. A lot of people talk about the learning organization, but how do you actually do that? And so bit by bit, you can kind of do interventions in these different layers, also depending on where you are in your maturity, because all companies are different. You might have a good foundation. People feel belonging, they have the right mindset, you hired well. Then you can look at the higher levels, which the two next levels are kind of fulfillment and collaboration. How fulfilled are people? How well do they collaborate? And then if you have all of that, then you have the perfect conditions for flow states. But that's kind of the top of the pyramid then. But it's these things. It's make an audit kind of also, like, be clear, what do you aspire to? Where am I? Where do I want to go? Or where do we want to go? And then what interventions do I need? And I think that's also where uh, where coaches can help a lot, and to kind of guide and accompany leaders along this journey, because it's a transformational journey. It takes time, and I think it's helpful to have someone a bit removed from it, who can help as a sparring partner to kind of take stock, how are things going. Because when you're inside the company, it's harder to see things clearly sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah, you're too close to the action, right? And
Yeah.
so you don't have that perspective that somebody can bring who's from the outside. And I think
Mm,
one other aspect of this that I would really love to hone in on a little bit is I think a lot of leaders in my conversations with folks across many different industries,
mm,
I think a lot of leaders are well-intentioned individuals. They see the problems that their teams are facing.
mm,
They know that they need to invest in improving the outcomes and incorporating frameworks and models that are going to change the way that their teams are operating, but
mhm,
they often feel overwhelmed. They think it's too much for one person or a small group to handle. So I would love to hear your take on this, Philippe, in terms of how much of this should be delegated. Should leaders be empowered to work, nominate folks from within their inner circle and others on their team, along with folks like you, coaches, right?
mhm.
How much of this can be a shared responsibility, would you say?
Uh, well, as very often, right? It depends, but I would say that in that sense, it's cannot the responsibility of it cannot be delegated, right? So if it's about the
Mm,
culture, the leader needs to kind of, well, he or she is the leader for a reason,
Hmm.
and needs to lead the way with this. But of course, we're talking about cultures which, by definition, are kind of inclusive and based on collaboration and trust and belonging and psychological safety and all of that. And if we talk about a group flow or these kind of things where you really get teams together and they kind of get this optimal collaboration going, then we also talk about open communication and shared goals, shared risk, and all of that. So it starts to be really a collective undertaking. So definitely, have people involved. Make sure that you don't create a culture which will drive your people away, right? You want people to be on board with this. So I think you can distribute responsibility. Also, people should feel responsible and accountable because every one of us who works in an organization shapes the culture with each of us shapes the culture with our behaviors, right? So
Hmm. Hmm.
um, it's a lot about that. It's like, as a leader, model the behaviors and then ask and demand from your team to follow the same behaviors. But well, it starts with defining what those behaviors are, right? And are they aligned to what we have been discussing? So definitely, it can
Absolutely.
be shared responsibility.
Yeah.
But someone needs to lead, I would say, especially if it's a transformation, and then other people
Yeah.
can come along and support, like coaches. And but of course, it depends a lot on the size of the company, the situation, the ownership, and whatnot.
So
Um,
many different factors
yeah, yeah,
potentially.
and then the
Yeah.
question is
Yeah.
also, are you really doing a big transformation of the whole company, or are you just trying to improve the culture within your team that where you have control
Yeah.
over? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's one size fits none, right? You always have to tailor
That's
it to
right.
the audience.
That's right. You do have to tailor it, and I think, but those fundamental takeaways, I think, are very crucial to any team, regardless of the size. How can folks learn about your work, Philippe? And I'd love for you to share,
Yeah.
resources and also anything in your pipeline that you'd love our audience to know about.
Yeah, so I'm most active on LinkedIn. So that's where people can connect and follow my account, Philippe Arnez, and yeah, that's where I post about all these things that we've discussed today and more, and also people who are interested to go deeper or the resources. I also share a lot about that there, and about Culture for Flow, the company, and and yeah, I think that it's so exciting because that I'm here with you today, because I've been working on something and thinking like, okay, the culture for flow is something that I'm trying to roll out to teams and organizations and so on. Um, but we've discussed today about how can we increase impact, how can we move towards cultures and companies that maybe put people and planet before profit. So I'm kind of launching an offer for change makers and entrepreneurs in that space, so that they can benefit of coaching, that they hopefully can make more with less. If you build this type of cultures and you can get into flow yourself as a founder, more often you you will just be more resilient also, and hopefully you can then also model that for your team and build a corresponding culture. So um fittingly, I'm starting this coach for flow. So it's something which is really more on one coaching for impact entrepreneurs, and I'm also launching a newsletter with that, which will be all about these topics that we've been discussing. So it's certainly one way where people can get a condensed, regular, source resource in their inbox. So I would invite people to sign up for that. Yeah, it's Coach for Flow, and yeah, it's really the idea that governments and big companies are kind of too slow for the change we need, and I'm convinced that it's smaller companies and innovators that will bring about the change, and I hope that I can kind of help building these communities of change makers that can learn from each other and grow together and kind of bring the change we need so much. So yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting, Philippe. I mean, I'll put all the links in the show notes. I met you on LinkedIn, so I can definitely vouch for your active
Yeah.
profile there and the work that you're doing. It's exciting to hear that you're launching Coach for Flow. That's, I think,
Mm,
incredible. And I agree with you, Philippe. I think larger organizations that are too big to fail, government organizations for sure, that are just so maybe embedded in their ways, right? The change needs to happen more from a bottom up approach than a top down approach. And I think these innovators and these change makers that you're looking to inspire and
mm,
really work with, I think they are the future of making flow a more accessible concept for for as many of us as possible. So that's exciting. And I also want to quickly mention, Philippe, if it's okay, on your website, I love that you have
mhm.
retreats. And I hope
Ah,
one
yeah.
day to be able to accompany you on a retreat. It would be great
Yeah.
to meet in person, to go to a fantastic offsite destination in Portugal or somewhere else in Europe. And that's an exciting way, I think, that you also build your community around these concepts.
Yeah, yeah, I do that with a partner who's based in Switzerland, and we're
Mm,
trying to kind of establish that on a regular basis. And the idea there is to combine these things that we've been discussing. So,
mm,
the how can you develop yourself as a leader, like around self leadership, and then how can you leverage flow science and practices, and kind of merging these two, so that kind of you can prepare yourself as a leader to build this type of companies and cultures and that are more resilient and and allow people to flourish. So that's kind of the idea behind it. And it's also, the type of setup and environment which allows people to do some of this, kind of strategic thinking. So kind of this time off and away where you can spend more time about thinking um, about these strategic questions. Yeah, so
yeah.
strategic retreat type of thing. We know that some of the big thought leaders and successful business people do these type of things regularly. So
Yeah, it's a great way
there's
to build community. It's a great way to
mm,
distance yourself from the day to day, change of
yeah,
scenery and being with people that are talking about, I think, really impactful and empowering topics.
yeah,
Philippe, it was a pleasure having you. It was so fun learning about the work you do, flow, and as well as culture for flow. Yeah, and I really appreciate your time.
yeah. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here, and what we had here was an interpersonal flow, I would say. So um, these type of conversations are always very inspiring, and thanks for your great work. And I'm looking forward to learn more about what you do and about future guests in your
Absolutely.
podcast.
Thank you so much.